When you hit rock bottom, you start measuring comfort by what doesn't hurt. That's how I ended up signing a lease for Unit 3B in a crumbling brick building on the east side of town. After a brutal breakup and walking out on a job that had drained every ounce of life out of me, I needed a reset. The apartment was cheap, suspiciously cheap, and the landlord didn't ask questions. He barely made eye contact, just slid the key across the counter and mumbled something about paying in cash. At the time, I thought it was a blessing. Now, I think he just didn't want to get involved. The building was ancient, a 5-story structure that had clearly been neglected for decades, the kind of place that smelled like wet wood and old paper. The hallway lights flickered as I climbed, the stairs casting erratic shadows that made everything look wrong. Like the building wasn't just decaying, but remembering something it didn't want to let go of. Unit 3B was at the far end of the 3rd floor corridor. The door was heavy and painted over so many times it barely closed right. When I pushed it open, it groaned like it hadn't moved in years. The air inside was stale and thick. I told myself it was just dust. The layout was simple. A small living room with a battered couch left behind by the previous tenant, a kitchen with cabinets that hung crooked on rusted hinges, and a bedroom just large enough to hold a single bed. The bathroom was more like a glorified closet, with a cracked mirror and a sink that whined every time you turned the faucet. Still, it was mine, and after everything I'd been through, having something to call my own felt like a win. I spent the first day unpacking, trying to mask the place's decay with a few personal touches. Some posters, a lamp from a thrift store, a rug to cover the warped floorboards. I even played music on my phone to fill the silence, but no matter what I did, the apartment never felt empty. It felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to leave so it could exhale. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I hadn't heard or seen a single neighbor since moving in. Not a footstep, not a voice. Just the occasional hum of pipes and the soft buzz of a light bulb straining to stay alive. Around midnight, just as I was starting to drift off, I heard something. A sound so faint I thought I imagined it at first. Tap, 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 like someone lightly drumming their fingers on the other side of the bedroom wall. I sat up, heart suddenly racing. The wall it came from was internal. There wasn't another apartment behind it, just the hallway. I got up and pressed my ear to it, listening. Nothing. Silence, thick enough to choke on. I laughed at myself. Old pipes, creaky wood. Maybe even rats in the walls. Old buildings made weird noises, right? I told myself I'd just been on edge from all the stress lately. The next day I decided to explore the apartment more thoroughly. I opened every drawer, every cabinet, even lifted the cushions on the couch. That's when I found it. Tucked in the back of a kitchen drawer behind some ancient takeout menus, a small leather-bound notebook. The cover was cracked and faded, and dust fell off it like ash. Inside, most of the pages were blank, but one page stood out. The handwriting was messy, jagged. It read, "It watches when the lights go out." I stared at those words for a long time. They shouldn't have meant anything, but something about them unsettled me more than I cared to admit. I laughed nervously, tried to play it off. Maybe it was a joke, or the last tenant was a horror junkie like me. I tossed the notebook into the trash, but I couldn't forget the way the letters looked, like they were carved in desperation, not inked. That night, I left a lamp on before going to bed. Just in case, sleep didn't come easy. I kept thinking about the notebook, the hallway beyond the wall, the way the building seemed to hum when everything else was quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the apartment, not in the traditional sense, but in some deeper, subtler way. Like the walls had eyes, like the air itself was watching me, and then it happened again. Just as I began to drift off, That same sound. Tap, tap, tap. Slower this time, more deliberate. I sat up, skin crawling. This wasn't old pipes or building creaks. This was rhythm, intention. I didn't move, I didn't breathe, I just listened. And in the silence that followed, I heard something else. My name. Soft as a sigh, whispered through the plaster. Ethan. I turned on every light in the apartment and didn't sleep a second that night. I spent the next morning pacing the apartment, replaying the whisper in my head over and over like a broken record. Ethan. It hadn't been loud. It hadn't even been menacing. But it didn't need to be. There's a kind of terror that seeps in when the rules of reality start to bend, when the walls you thought were dead matter suddenly know your name. I checked everything, twice. The locks, the windows, the hallway. No signs of forced entry, no open vents. Just the same flickering light bulbs and the musty scent of damp drywall. I knocked on the bedroom wall from the inside. Solid. Then I stepped out into the hallway and knocked from the other side. Still solid. No crawl spaces, no doors, no pipes I could see. Just that decaying plaster and a silence that seemed to lean. Closer, the longer I stood still. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe I had fallen asleep and dreamed the whole thing. Sleep deprivation could do that. I hadn't been eating well. I hadn't really felt settled since I moved in. But even when I managed to reason my way out of it, something inside me didn't believe it. There was a part of me, some quiet primal instinct, that was screaming to leave, but I didn't. Instead, I tried to reclaim control in the only way I knew how, by normalizing the situation. I went grocery shopping. I cooked a real dinner. I even took a hot shower and played music on my phone. I refused to give in to fear. But when night came, I found myself hesitating at the bedroom door. I stared at the switch for the ceiling light, my hand hovering just above it. In the end, I left the lamp on again, just like the night before. It felt stupid, childish. But when I lay down, eyes fixed on the soft circle of yellow light on the wall, I couldn't deny that it brought some small brittle comfort. That comfort shattered just after midnight. Tap. I sat up, instantly. My heart didn't just pound, it clanged, like it was trying to tear its way out of my ribs. I waited. Tap, tap. This time it was louder. Not aggressive, but unmistakably real. I swung my legs out of bed and stood, barefoot on the cold wood floor. The air in the room felt denser, heavier. I crept to the wall and pressed my ear against it. Nothing. But I didn't believe the silence. Not anymore. I was about to turn away when I heard it again. Softer now, but slower. Almost expectant. Tap. I pressed my hand flat against the wall. It felt cold, slightly damp. I whispered, "Who's there?" Nothing. Just the quiet hum of electricity in the wires, the low buzz of the city far below. I backed away, grabbed the chair from the desk and wedged it under the doorknob. A barricade. It was meaningless, really, I knew that, but it gave me a false sense of security. That night, I barely closed my eyes. Every time I started to drift, I imagined something, crawling inside the wall, something without form or eyes or skin, something pressing its face against the plaster just inches away from mine, smiling. In the morning, I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just the creaks of an old building, maybe even a squirrel trapped in the attic. I left the apartment, got coffee at a nearby shop, and sat outside in the sunlight for over an hour. I watched people walk their dogs, heard traffic, felt the wind. For a moment I felt normal again, human. But that changed the second I walked back through the apartment door. The silence was waiting for me. Not peaceful silence, hollow silence. the kind that feels like it's been holding its breath, watching. I unpacked my groceries, trying to ignore how the shadows under the cabinet seemed darker than they had been before. I opened the fridge, and something inside rattled. Just an old condiment bottle shifting, I told myself. But I jumped anyway. Later that afternoon, I opened the trash can to toss some packaging, and there it was, the notebook. The same leather-bound book I had thrown away the day before. Its cover was dusted again, like it had been sitting there for years. My hands went cold. I didn't pick it up. I didn't want to know if the writing had changed. That night I kept all the lights on, every single one. I sat in the living room with the TV playing old comedies I wasn't really watching. My eyes kept drifting toward the hallway. The lamp near the couch flickered once, then again. Then it went out completely. I stood up slowly, not daring to breathe. The hallway stretched longer than it had earlier, the shadows spilling across the walls like spilled ink. And then, barely louder than a sigh, I heard it again. Ethan. This time it wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from behind me. I turned. Nothing. The room was empty. And yet I wasn't alone. Something changed after that third night. It wasn't just the whispers or the knocks or even the shadows that clung too long in the corners. It was the way the apartment began to respond. I don't know how else to explain it. Everything that had once been passive, walls, doors, furniture, now felt alert, waiting. I could sense it the moment I opened my eyes each morning. Or maybe it started before that, during sleep, when I was most vulnerable. The boundary between waking and dreaming had begun to blur, and I no longer trusted which side I stood on. It started with the mirror. The one in the bathroom had always been cracked. A long fracture ran diagonally from corner to corner, like a jagged scar. On that morning, the glass looked different, shinier somehow, clearer despite the damage. I leaned in to brush my teeth, still bleary-eyed, and caught my reflection doing something wrong. I blinked, and it blinked a fraction of a second too late. Not even a full beat, just enough for my brain to register that something was off. I froze, toothbrush hanging from my mouth, foam dripping down my chin as I stared into my own eyes. And then it smiled. I didn't. It was a twitch, almost imperceptible. But it was there. My reflection, my face, grinned at me just for a moment before returning to its neutral expression. I backed out of the bathroom so fast I tripped on the doorframe. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the distortion from the crack in the glass, the result of not sleeping for 3 days. But deep down, I knew better. I avoided that mirror for the rest of the day. Hell, I avoided every reflective surface. In the apartment, I turned off my phone screen whenever I wasn't using it, covered the TV with a blanket, even flipped over a picture frame that had a bit too much shine on the glass. Paranoia, maybe. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being mimicked, not just watched but copied, poorly. That night I tried to sleep with my back to the mirror. I closed the bathroom door, but I could still see the edge of the frame through the hallway. It felt like an open eye. I left the bedside lamp on again. As the minutes turned to hours, the shadows grew longer, sharper. Every time I blinked, it felt like the room had shifted slightly, like the corners were bending inward. And then I heard it again, scratching. This time it wasn't tapping. It was something rough dragging along the inside of the wall. Nails, maybe, or claws. The sound moved slowly from the bathroom to the bedroom wall, stopping just behind the headboard. I sat up, heart pounding, and grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand. The bulb flickered when I turned it on, dim and weak. Still, I shined it. On the wall. Nothing, but the scratching had stopped. I lay back down, trying not to panic, telling myself again and again that this was all in my head, that I needed sleep. But as I rolled onto my side, facing the bathroom door, I saw the mirror. The door was open. I hadn't opened it, and in the mirror I saw myself, lying in bed, just as I was, but my eyes were closed. In real life, I was staring wide open in terror, but the reflection was still, sleeping. And then, slowly, its eyes opened. I screamed and threw the flashlight at the mirror. It shattered with a deafening crack, shards raining into the sink and tile. For a few long seconds, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the hum of the overhead light. Then the silence returned, heavy, watching. I didn't sleep. Sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, facing the hallway with a kitchen knife in my lap. I waited for something to move, for the voice to return, for the wall to bleed or breathe or crumble into that dark place I was beginning to believe lay just behind it. But nothing happened, not that night. The next morning I forced myself to clean the bathroom. Glass was everywhere. Some pieces were so small they glittered like dust. I swept slowly, carefully, wincing each time I touched a shard. My fingers bled. I didn't care. I needed it gone. All of it. Every trace of that reflection. But when I pulled back the shower curtain to check for stray pieces, I found something else instead. A smear. A grey, ash-colored handprint, stretched long across, the inside of the tub wall. 5 fingers. No thumb. It looked like it had been left by something with wet soot for skin. The shape was wrong. Too narrow, too tall, like someone had dragged their hand along the wall as they slipped back into the shadows. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled backward into the hallway, nearly knocking over the lamp. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I might faint. But I didn't. I just stood there staring at the open bathroom and the thing it had shown me. That's when I realized the apartment was no longer reacting to me. It was anticipating me. Every step I took, it seemed, to prepare for the next. I wasn't just living in it. I was being choreographed, guided. Each event carefully timed, each whisper delivered at the edge of sleep, each reflection a calculated strike against my sanity. It knew me, and worse, it wanted me to know it too. Used to think silence was peaceful. Now I know better. Real silence, the kind that stretches thin over hours and thickens the air like fog, is not empty at all. It's filled with anticipation, with the tension of something unseen holding its breath. That's what the apartment became. Not a place to live, but a presence. It watched me with its walls, listened through the floorboards, whispered in its stillness. Even during the day, when light poured through the windows and the outside world buzzed faintly below, the silence inside 3B pressed in like a closed fist. And at night, it became unbearable. The whispers started soon after I destroyed the mirror. At first, they came as soft sighs, like wind slipping through an unseen crack in the plaster. But they always happened just as I was about to fall asleep, never sooner, never later. That was what made them different, intentional. I'd be lying on my side, blanket pulled tight, eyes heavy, and then I'd hear it, a breath, a shape of a voice. Not quite words, but something close, something with purpose. I would sit up, heart racing, and listen, only to find nothing. And yet the moment I tried to sleep again, they returned, closer, clearer. I started recording the nights. I downloaded a sleep monitoring app and left my phone on the nightstand, microphone open, hoping to catch something. But every morning, the recordings were the same, just static and the occasional rustle of bed sheets. Once I played one back and could swear I heard something faint beneath the hum, a hiss maybe, or my name. But when I replayed the clip, it was gone. That's when I began staying up late, forcing myself awake with coffee and bad television. I left every light in the apartment on, each room glowing a dull yellow under tired bulbs. The electricity bill would be a nightmare, but I didn't care. Darkness felt like an invitation now, and I wasn't ready to see what might walk through the door. I stopped using the bedroom altogether. I started sleeping, if you could call it that, on the couch, under the harsh glow of the kitchen ceiling light. But even there, sleep was fleeting, fractured by that same sense of being watched. It wasn't just psychological. I could feel it. A weight. A shift in the air every time I let my eyes close. One night, I woke up not from a sound, but from a sensation, like something was hovering over me. My skin prickled, my mouth was dry. I opened my eyes slowly, every instinct in me screaming not to. And in the corner of the room, between the coat rack and the wall, something moved. Just a flicker, a suggestion of motion, but I saw it. I bolted upright and stared, heart slamming against my ribs. There was nothing there now, just shadows cast by a kitchen chair and the flicker of a nearly dead bulb. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there only moments, before watching, waiting. The next morning I found the living room window wide open. I never opened that window. The latch was stiff, old, it took effort to even nudge it, and yet there it was, letting in the cold air, letting the city's noise bleed into my tomb-like apartment. Papers had blown off the coffee table. A small plant I'd forgotten to water lay tipped over on the floor, soil scattered across the carpet. But that wasn't the worst part. Scratched into the inside of the window frame, just above the lock, was a single word. Stay. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. My hands hovered over the mark, trembling, as my mind tried to conjure a rational explanation. Maybe it had always been there. Maybe a previous tenant had carved it. Maybe it wasn't new. But I knew better. That night, the whispers became voices. Not words, not exactly, but syllables bent just enough to sound familiar. They came from the vents, from behind the walls, from the drains in the bathroom sink. At one point, I swear I heard a voice bubbling up from the toilet, so faint I thought it might be the sound of old pipes, but it was rhythmic, deliberate. It sounded like breathing through water. I slammed the lid down and didn't open it for days. I started sleeping with headphones in, white noise on loop, volume up just high enough to block everything out. It helped, sometimes. Other times I would wake to silence, only to realize the headphones had been removed from my ears, laid neatly on the table beside me. I stopped questioning how. The worst was the moment I heard my name, again, but this time it came from my own phone. I hadn't touched it, hadn't opened any apps, it was locked, screen dark, and yet I heard it clearly from the speaker. Ethan, like a breath, like a promise. That was when I started wondering whether it was the apartment that was haunted, or if I was, because wherever I went, the air now followed me, heavy, tense. The lights flickered in the stairwell. Strangers on the street stared too long, as if they recognized something crawling behind my eyes. I caught my reflection once more, in the darkened screen of a storefront, and for a split second, I saw my lips moving even though I hadn't said a word. The whisper was inside me now, and the apartment somehow was breathing through me. It was around this time that I reached out to Jordan. I hadn't spoken to him in weeks. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to explain what was happening without sounding insane. But when your apartment whispers your name, when your own reflection wears someone else's smile, sanity stops being a comfort and starts feeling like a lie you tell yourself to survive. I needed someone, anyone, who could stand in that space with me and tell me I wasn't losing my mind. Jordan didn't hesitate. He always had that easygoing, grounding presence, the kind of guy who brought normalcy into every room he entered, like it was part of his aura. I texted him, short and simple, "Need help, come over." His reply came less than a minute later. On my way. When he arrived that evening, carrying a six-pack and wearing that familiar grin, I almost cried. Not out of joy, but out of pure relief. For the first time in weeks, someone else would be in this place. Someone else would breathe the air I'd been choking on. Someone else would hear it. He stepped inside and immediately wrinkled his nose. "Dude, what's that smell?" I hadn't noticed it at first, but now that he mentioned it, I realized the apartment had taken on a strange odor, something metallic, like pennies soaked in bleach. I shrugged. "Old pipes, maybe." He raised an eyebrow but didn't push. We sat on the couch, talked nonsense for a while, sports, work, some girl he'd been dating. I tried to laugh when he did, to match his tone, but it felt like my face wasn't mine anymore, like I was puppeting my own expressions. Eventually, he leaned forward and said, "So, what's really going on, Ethan?" I told him everything. Not all at once, not in one overwhelming purge, but slowly. The knocks, the whispers, the mirror, the dreams, the thing that moved just outside my line of sight. I expected him to laugh, or at least look at me with that careful concern people wear when they're about to tell you to seek professional help. But he didn't. He was quiet. Too quiet. Then he stood and said, "Okay, show me." I took him to the bathroom first, showed him the smeared handprint still etched faintly on the tile even after all my scrubbing. He ran his fingers over it and shivered. "That's not paint." Then the window. The word "stay" had begun to fade, but you could still see the carved lines if you looked at the frame from a certain angle in the light. He stared at it. For a long time, lips pressed into a tight line. Finally, I brought him to the bedroom. The moment we stepped inside, something shifted. The temperature dropped a few degrees. The air went still. And from the wall beside the bed, we both heard it, whispering, faint, incoherent, like someone was talking through layers of cloth. Jordan turned to me, pale. "You hear that, right?" I nodded, barely able to speak. "Every night." We stood, in silence, frozen. Then, clear as day, we both heard it again. Ethan, and then Jordan, his name, spoken in that same breathy tone, like someone exhaling a secret just beneath your skin. Jordan stepped back fast, bumping into the doorframe. "Nope, nope, I'm out." "Wait," I said, grabbing his arm. "Please, just stay tonight." Just please." He hesitated. I could see the war behind his eyes, but then he nodded. "Fine, I'll crash on the couch." We didn't speak much after that. We watched a movie with the volume too loud, both pretending we weren't, thinking about the voices. Jordan eventually dozed off on the couch, and I dragged myself into the bedroom. I left the door open. I wanted to know if he called out. I wanted to know if it got him too. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. Jordan was shaking me. His face was pale, slick with sweat. "Dude, what the hell is wrong with your walls?" I blinked, disoriented. "What?" Heard it. Breathing, not you. From the wall behind the couch, then whispering. Then he stopped, swallowed. It said my name. I swear to God, Ethan. We both sat there, backs against the wall, eyes scanning the dark apartment. The whispers were gone. For now. Jordan left the next morning. He said he had to work, but I knew better. He didn't even finish his coffee. Before he stepped out the door, he paused. "I don't know what's going on here, man, but you're not crazy. Just don't stay here alone, okay?" But I did. Of course I did. Where else was I supposed to go? After he left, the apartment felt hungrier, like it had been starved of validation, and now that someone else had acknowledged its existence, it wanted more. It whispered louder that night. The knocks became more erratic, impatient, and for the first time, I heard something behind my own voice. Not an echo, a second voice, whispering the same words, slightly out of sync. My own voice, layered with another. That's when I knew. It wasn't just speaking to me, it was learning to speak as me. The day after Jordan left, I tried to pretend I was still in control. that I could shower, cook breakfast, fold my laundry, and carry on with life like any other person who wasn't slowly being swallowed by the walls around him. But everything felt off, disconnected. I'd pour cereal into a bowl and realize I didn't remember getting the box from the cupboard. I'd walk into the bathroom and stare into the cracked, mirrorless wall above the sink and swear I'd just seen myself walk out. There was a lag between thought and movement, like my limbs were waiting for someone else to decide what to do. It felt like I was borrowing my own body, like someone had granted me temporary access to a shell that no longer belonged to me. That night, I found writing on the walls. Not words, symbols, circles within spirals, open eyes with no pupils, runes, scratched into the paint with something sharp. At first, I thought someone had broken in, but the locks were still latched, the windows sealed. My building was ancient. No one could climb up to the third floor without making a racket. Then I realized the truth. The pen was on the floor next to the drawings. My fingerprints were on it, and when I picked it up, my hand fit the grooves perfectly. I sat down on the floor in front of one of the symbols and stared at it until my legs went numb. I didn't remember drawing it, but I knew what it meant. It wasn't just gibberish. It was an invitation, or a map, or both. And somehow I understood it the way you understand your name being called from across a crowded room. Instinctively, viscerally. The walls weren't the only things changing. I started waking up in different positions, not just tossing and turning, but in places I had no memory of moving to. I'd fall asleep on the couch and wake up standing in the bathroom with my hand pressed against the wall. One morning I found myself in the hallway outside my apartment door, barefoot, wearing only a t-shirt, cold linoleum beneath me, and the word mine scrawled in black across the inside of the door. Not written by me, but not entirely not written by me either. The first time I saw my face shift, I screamed. It was in the microwave door. Just a faint reflection, blurry, distorted, but enough to see that my expression was wrong. My eyes too wide, my mouth parted like it was mid-laugh, but no sound came out. It was like something else had been wearing my skin for a moment, slipped up and left the mask tilted just long enough for me to catch it. I stopped using mirrors. I covered anything that could reflect. Phone screens, glass windows. I even taped over the reflective edges of picture frames. But reflections weren't the only thing betraying me. My voice recorder became my only companion. It was the only way I could document the changes, to prove to myself that I wasn't completely unhinged. I would speak into it in the dark, my voice trembling, whispering thoughts I didn't trust myself to say aloud. I'd play them back in the morning just to confirm I was still me. But the playback changed. My voice started to layer. First just static, then a subtle echo. Then, unmistakably, another voice weaving itself between my words like thread through fabric. It didn't mimic me. It anticipated me. It would say the next word before I did, as though it already knew the thought before it left my lips. And sometimes it didn't wait at all. Sometimes the recorder would play back things I never said, secrets I never told, memories I'd buried. I see what you see. That line repeated more than once. Never in my voice, always in something. Deeper. Older. Something that felt like it came from inside my bones. My body began to feel foreign. My skin prickled in places without cause, like tiny insects crawling just beneath the surface. My hands trembled when I tried to write, as if something inside them wanted to draw those symbols again but didn't want me to know it yet. I avoided sleep, terrified of what I might do next. But sleep always came eventually, and with it, darkness, in night. One dream, or maybe it wasn't a dream, I stood in the center of my apartment staring at the walls which now pulsed like living flesh. I heard breathing, slow and deep, matching the rise and fall of the wallpaper, as if the apartment itself had grown lungs. A figure stepped out from the crack in the corner, tall and slender, smooth grey skin stretched over a boneless frame. No face, just a blank expanse where features should have been, and yet I recognized it. It was me, not as I looked now, but as I was becoming. Hollow-eyed, mouth slack, skin ash-colored and unreal. When I woke, I was on the kitchen floor, fingernails, blackened, mouth dry, and a single phrase written across my arm in thick red marker. I am you. I hadn't written it, at least not while I was awake. The worst part wasn't the loss of memory or the shifting reflections or the writing on the walls. The worst part was the feeling that I was becoming agreeable. That whatever was inside me, whatever had seeped into my bones through the cracks in the walls, wasn't just invading me. It was reshaping me, preparing me. I no longer recoiled at the whispers. I began to expect them, crave them. I'd find myself sitting in the dark, lips parted, listening, hoping. The day I smiled without meaning to, just before the mirror cracked. Again I knew the truth. My body was no longer mine, and it hadn't been for some time. Desperation doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It seeps in quietly, replacing hope molecule by molecule, until you find yourself Googling phrases like how to break a spiritual attachment and signs you're being possessed. I had crossed that line days ago, maybe weeks. I didn't know anymore. Time had warped. Clock stopped working. My phone reset itself nightly. Shadows lengthened at the wrong hour. I stopped pretending this was anything less than a war of attrition, and I was losing. So I did what any terrified, exhausted, fractured person would do when logic and sanity had failed. I looked for a psychic. Her name was Maureen Carver. She didn't advertise with neon signs or a crystal ball logo, just a plain white website and a tagline that read, "Sometimes what haunts you isn't dead, it's waiting." That was all it took. I sent her a message at 3 in the morning. She called me 20 minutes later. Her voice was calm, soft, worn in the way of people who've seen too much and come out the other side a little frayed. She asked for no details, only an address and a time. We agreed on noon the next day. I asked her if I needed to prepare anything. Her answer was simple. Don't open the door unless it's me. The next morning, the apartment was quieter than usual. The walls still pulsed faintly when I walked by them, but the whispers were subdued, almost hesitant, as if the place sensed something was coming that it didn't like. I waited on the couch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, staring at the front door, afraid it would knock before she did. Maureen arrived exactly at noon. She wore a navy peacoat, her grey-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun. Her eyes were sharp, scanning every inch of me, as if she already knew where the rot had taken root. She stepped inside and immediately flinched. "Oh no," she said. She hadn't even crossed the threshold yet. "What is it?" I asked, voice already trembling. She closed the door behind her slowly, almost ceremonially, and set a leather satchel down on the table. From it, she pulled out a few small jars of salt, a handful of crystals, and a bundle of sage already burned down to a blackened stem. Then she turned to me. "There's something ancient in this place," she said. "It's not just feeding on you. It's folding itself around you, like skin." I nodded. I had no words, just a sick kind of relief that someone else could feel it too. She began walking through the apartment without waiting for direction. The hallway, the kitchen, the living room, all of it received a glance, a furrowed brow, a whispered chant I couldn't decipher. But when she reached the bedroom, she stopped cold. "The doorway is here." "The crack?" I asked. She looked at me sharply. "You can see it?" I nodded. She knelt down in front of the wall near the bed, the place where the crack had first appeared weeks ago, and ran her hand just inches above the surface. She didn't touch it. Her palm hovered, and in the charged air between her skin and the wall, the space seemed to hum. "Whatever lives on the other side is no longer content staying there," she said. "It's made a deal with something inside you. A bond. A gateway. Can you close it?" She didn't answer right away. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Not from this side." The floor groaned. The temperature dropped instantly. The walls exhaled. Something was listening. She pulled a piece of red twine from her coat and drew a circle on the floor with salt. "Sit," she commanded. I obeyed. She stood over me, walking clockwise, murmuring in a tongue I didn't recognize. As she worked, the air thickened. The corners of the room bent subtly inward. The light dimmed without the bulb changing. My ears popped. Then the whispering returned, but not like before. This time it wasn't scattered or faint. It was unified, loud, voices overlapping, speaking, in a dozen dialects, all saying the same word, mine. The crack in the wall widened, not gradually, but with a sound like splitting flesh. A vertical gash tore down from ceiling to floor, revealing a swirling blackness behind it, pulsing like a wound. From within, it stepped forward, the Hollow King. I had never seen it so clearly before. Its form was tall, too tall, with limbs that stretched and twisted like smoke trailing underwater. Its face, or where a face should have been, was smooth, pale, a blank canvas that seemed to ripple with emotion it couldn't express. No eyes, no mouth. But somehow it was smiling. Maureen gasped, stepping backward. "No, not yet." The entity lunged. Shadows exploded outward like a wave, knocking her off her feet. I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't move. My body felt nailed to the floor. The salt circle sparked, actually sparked, sending a brief flash of light upward that caused the entity to recoil. But only for a second. Then its limbs twisted around Maureen. Not physically, spiritually. They latched onto something inside her and began to pull. She screamed, her voice warping as if it were being filtered through static and wind. The shadows dragged her backward toward the crack. "No!" I shouted. Her eyes met mine, wide, terrified. "And yet?" She nodded, and then she was gone, swallowed. The crack sealed behind her with a sickening wet sound. I crawled to the spot where she had stood. Only one thing remained, a silver chain with a small pendant in the shape of an eye. It was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. I clutched it tight in my fist and wept. The apartment had returned to silence, but not peace, never peace. The shadows had tasted blood, and I knew then. I was next. After Maureen was taken, the apartment changed. The silence no longer felt passive. It became oppressive, deliberate, like the air itself was watching me with held breath, waiting for me to realize the truth. The Hollow King was no longer confined to the crack in the wall. That thin boundary, that wound in space she had tried to close, had been a kind of leash. But when it swallowed her, when it pulled her into the dark, it wasn't just consuming her, it was crossing through. Something had slipped into my world that didn't belong here, and it wasn't content to hide anymore. The first night after, she vanished. The entire apartment felt like it was breathing in rhythm with me. The walls would contract slightly whenever I inhaled, like lungs pushing in, pressing against my skin. I curled up on the couch, every light on. The pendant she left behind clenched in my hand. I was too afraid to cry, afraid that the sound might attract it. But tears came anyway, silent and hot, trailing down my cheeks in the flickering light. At 3:33 a.m., I knew the time without checking. Every single light in the apartment blinked out. Not like a power outage. There was still a faint hum from the refrigerator. The red LED on my surge protector still glowed. But the bulbs themselves gave up, burned out, simultaneously. I sat in pitch darkness, paralyzed, listening for movement. But there was nothing, just the deep, unnatural quiet that follows a scream in a dream. Except this wasn't a dream. This was waking terror. This was something real. When morning came, I tried to act like the night hadn't happened. I replaced bulbs, ran the shower until the mirror fogged, ate toast. But everything tasted wrong. The water had a faint metallic tang. The toast was cold the moment it touched my tongue. My reflection in the fogged mirror stared too long before copying my movements, and when I turned my head to the side, I saw for a split second a second reflection just behind me. Taller, featureless, grey. I ran. Not out of the apartment, out of myself. I put on shoes I didn't remember tying and jacket sleeves that felt tighter than usual. I didn't look back as I rushed down the stairs, past the flickering hallway light and out into the open air. I hadn't stepped outside in days, and the sunlight hit me like a slap. For the first time in what felt like forever, I breathed deeply, and that's when I heard it. A whisper, not from inside my apartment, not from behind the walls or inside the vents, but from inside me. It sounded like breath in my lungs, like words forming in the hollow between heartbeats. "You brought me with you," I staggered. People walked by without noticing. I must have looked insane, swaying on the sidewalk like a drunk. But no one made eye contact. Maybe they didn't see me. Maybe whatever had attached itself to me was already starting to blur the edges of my existence. I walked for hours, through streets I didn't recognize, across intersections I barely remembered crossing. I ended up at a small park on the edge of the city. Children played nearby. An old man fed pigeons. I sat on a bench beneath a tree and closed my eyes, hoping the sunlight and wind would wash the darkness off me. But when I opened my eyes again, the tree overhead wasn't the same. Its leaves had turned black. Its trunk was pulsing, and from the shadows at its base, something watched me. Not with eyes, but with presence. I stumbled back, blinking, and everything looked normal again. Green leaves, bark, earth, but my hands were shaking uncontrollably. I checked my phone. The screen was cracked. The time had stopped at 3:33, I knew. Then the Hollow King was no longer inside the apartment. He was inside me. Over the next few days, strange things followed me like echoes. Pigeons on street corners would stop moving when I passed. Their heads would tilt in perfect synchronization. Children would start crying the moment I sat on a bus. Streetlights above me would flicker and die. And the voice in my head grew bolder. Not constant, but sudden. It would appear in moments of stillness, whispering phrases that felt like foreign thoughts injected into my mind. "You are my doorway. I know your blood. I wore your smile before you did." At night, even when I wasn't in the apartment, I'd hear tapping. On bus windows, on the side of garbage bins. Once in the middle of a grocery store aisle, I heard it. Tap, tap, tap on the back of my shopping cart. I turned, but there was no one there. Just a smear of grey on the metal, like a handprint. Like ash. Eventually, I tried staying at Jordan's place. I didn't tell him everything, just that I needed to get away. He welcomed me with a nervous smile and a tight hug, clearly sensing I was worse than when he last saw me. His apartment was clean, bright, and full of the smells of food and life. For a moment, I almost believed I could outrun the thing, that maybe I had left it behind. But that first night, I woke up to find a single black thread hanging from the ceiling above my bed. Just one. Thin, red-tinged at the end. It dropped down in a slow spiral, dancing in the air as if pulled from something deeper. I pulled it down with trembling fingers. It wasn't thread. It was hair. Not mine. And in the bathroom mirror, just before I smashed it, I saw a tall grey figure standing behind me, smiling. It started in my dreams, or what I thought were dreams. I'd close my eyes and feel my body fall backward into something weightless, like slipping beneath the surface of a dark, motionless lake. There was no sound, no sensation of time passing, just a thick, numbing quiet. And then I would be there, in the forest. At first it came only in flashes, the gnarled trunks of towering trees, pale as bone, their bark peeling like dead skin, the dirt beneath my feet, black and moist like rot, the air tinged with something acidic and sharp, like the breath of something old and unclean, and the sky, if it could be called that, hung above in a swirling shade of crimson, as if blood had been diluted into storm clouds. There was no wind, nothing moved, but I always felt like I was being watched. Each time I dreamed of it, I woke up with more of it burned into my memory. The red forest, the silence, the looming sense of presence. But the worst part wasn't the place itself, it was what I began to see standing among the trees. At first it was only a silhouette, tall and unmoving, far off in the distance. But each night it got closer. Every dream pulled me deeper into the woods, closer to the thing that stood waiting with its featureless face and impossibly long limbs. I knew what it was. I didn't need it to speak. I recognized its stillness. It was the Hollow King, but he wasn't alone. On the fifth night I turned around, something I'd never done in the dream before. Behind me, scattered among the trees, like statues lost in time, stood others. Dozens, maybe hundreds. They were human, or they had been once. Some looked whole. Others were cracked, twisted, blurred around the edges like fading photographs. They didn't move, didn't speak. But I recognized their eyes, wide, hollow, terrified, and I recognized some of their faces. There was a girl I hadn't seen since high school, someone who'd vanished without explanation our senior year. I remembered the posters stapled to light poles, the whispered rumors about a hiking trip gone. Wrong. There was a man who'd lived in my building before me, Carter Raines. The landlord had mentioned him once. A quiet tenant who'd left all his belongings behind one day and disappeared. And there, among them, was my uncle, my mother's brother. He had vanished when I was 8, during a solo backpacking trip in the Rockies. Everyone assumed he'd fallen or gotten lost, but I remembered the last thing he ever said to me before he left. Sometimes the woods whisper back. They were all here, trapped, claimed. I stumbled backward, breath catching in my throat, but I didn't wake up. The Hollow King raised one long arm, not to reach for me, but to gesture toward the forest behind him. And without moving its mouth, because it had no mouth, I heard its voice in my head. You passed through, but you did not close it. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. I didn't mean to. I didn't open it. I swear I didn't. You looked. You listened. You welcomed. Its voice wasn't loud, but it resonated, vibrating through my ribs, shaking something loose in my chest that felt like shame. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The trees around me began to creak, as if breathing again for the first time in years. The shadows lengthened. A pressure built in the air. And then the forest opened beneath me. The ground cracked like glass, revealing a void beneath it. Red light, black smoke, and whispers rising like steam. I fell into it screaming, weightless, wordless, helpless. I woke up in my apartment, on the floor curled in a ball, shivering, the skin of my hands scraped raw. My mouth was dry, and there was blood on my shirt. Not much, just a smear. But I knew it hadn't come from me. For hours I sat in silence, shaking, trying to understand what the forest was. I thought maybe it was a dream realm. Maybe a dimension attached to the cracks, some fractured place where the Hollow King ruled. But it wasn't just a place. It was a prison, a feeding ground. And everyone in it had been drawn there the same way I had, by whispers, by cracks, by reflections that blinked too late, and dreams that didn't end when you woke up. It wasn't random. It was curated, personal, and if I was seeing them, if I was now walking in that forest, it meant I was almost gone. The next night, I tried to stay awake. I drank coffee until I felt sick. I played music on loop. I paced. But sometime past 3 a.m. I must have closed my eyes. Just for a second, I opened them standing in front of the Hollow King. This time, I wasn't in the distance. This time, he was inches away. The forest around us was gone. The trees had pulled back. We were standing on raw red ground that pulsed like muscle. His face loomed over me, blank, smooth, glowing faintly from within. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, but my lips parted and I heard my own voice say, "I'm ready." Then I woke, but the forest stayed, in my dreams, in my thoughts, in the corners of my vision. Even in the sound of my own breath, there was something foreign now, like a second rhythm beneath my inhale, a hidden echo to every exhale. The Hollow King had marked me, the forest had accepted me, and I knew without a doubt that if I didn't find a way to sever the connection, I'd never leave. Not really. One day I would wake up and find I wasn't in the apartment anymore. I'd be standing among the others, still, silent, and hollow. When I woke from the red forest, I didn't scream. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I lay still on the apartment floor, staring at the ceiling, waiting for my breath to sound like my own again. It didn't. Something echoed underneath each inhale, like a wheeze without cause, like the building exhaling through my throat. I knew I couldn't stay here much longer. I wasn't just haunted, I was inhabited. And if the Hollow King had stepped through the crack once, he could do it again. Maureen's final words haunted me almost as much as her disappearance. Not from this side. That meant something, a clue, a weakness. There had to be a way to undo this, to seal the tear between worlds, but not from here. So the only path left was back through it. If I could find what connected me to the Hollow King, I could maybe, just maybe, sever the bond before it swallowed me whole. I began searching the apartment like a man possessed, pulling up floorboards, tearing down old paneling, checking behind every piece of furniture and inside every vent. Most of what I found was dust, mold, old pennies, dead spiders. But behind the refrigerator, in a gap no wider than a paperback, I found something wrapped in black cloth. It pulsed faintly when I touched it, like it had its own heartbeat. My fingers recoiled instinctively, but I forced myself to unwrap it. Inside was a wooden box, small and carved with runes I'd seen in my sleep. Not written, dreamed. The symbols seemed to shimmer not with light but with recognition. I opened the box slowly, and inside lay a bone, no longer than my finger. It looked avian, hollow and dry, wrapped tightly in red thread that had begun to fray. As soon as I lifted it from the box, the lights in the apartment dimmed. Not all at once, but room by room, like the building was holding its breath again, waiting for me to speak. So I did. I returned what I stole, I said, voice barely above a whisper. I closed what I opened. The floor trembled beneath me. A low hum filled the air, deep, guttural, like a growl building in the throat of something larger than sound. I clutched the bone harder, felt the thread bite into my palm, and I knew this wasn't just some ceremonial token. This was a key or a trigger, maybe both. The crack in the wall returned, not the small jagged line I'd first seen weeks ago, but a full tear, black at the center, rimmed with pulsing red veins like an open wound. It stretched wide enough to step through, and the red forest shimmered beyond it. I could see the trees swaying now, slow and rhythmic, as if reacting to my presence, as if they were breathing me in. But I didn't move, not yet. Instead, I pulled the pendant Maureen had left from my pocket and placed it gently in front of the crack. The metal burned hot in my hand, and when it touched the floor, It hissed like meat on a skillet. The crack shuddered, reacted, and then the Hollow King appeared. He didn't step through this time. He didn't need to. He just was, looming behind the tear, taller than I remembered. His blank face stretched tight like damp parchment over bone. His arms didn't move, but I felt him reaching. The thread in my hand tightened, burning into my skin. The bone trembled. "You cannot undo the blood," the voice said, not aloud but inside me. Inside my chest, my bones, my marrow. "You are the door. You are the key. There is no severing." I looked up at him, tears forming unbidden. "Then I'll burn it shut." I stepped into the salt circle I had redrawn earlier, the one Maureen had traced so carefully weeks ago. The Hollow King recoiled slightly, his body twitching at the border. I held the bone above the box and began to unravel the red thread. As I did, the whispering began again, this time not around me but through me, vibrating in my jaw, echoing behind my eyes. "Mine, mine, mine, Ethan, stay, mine." I pressed the bone into the box, rewrapped it tightly with the thread, knotting it again and again until the symbols on the box began to glow faintly with a dull red light. The crack thrashed now, as if resisting, shrinking and expanding in rapid pulses like a heart in arrhythmia. "You cannot return what was promised," the Hollow King hissed. "Are you aware my voice? You carry my name." I screamed through clenched teeth. "Then take it back." And with that I threw the box into the crack. The effect was immediate. The apartment roared, not with sound but pressure. Every wall shook. Every bulb shattered. Wind, though none should exist indoors, whipped around me in a vortex of screaming whispers. The crack pulsed one final time, and then began to close. Slowly. Reluctantly. The Hollow King twisted in protest, his form convulsing, as if he were being crushed by the closing door. I saw his hands reach forward, not for me but for the forest, as if trying to anchor himself to that realm, to pull it into mine. But the thread snapped. A sound like a tendon tearing rang out through the apartment, and the crack sealed with a deafening silence. 1 second it was chaos, the next nothing. The air was still. The light returned. The shadows retreated to their corners. And I stood alone in the middle of my ruined living room, holding the pendant, blood dripping from my clenched hand, my skin still marked with the burn of the thread. I didn't fall. I didn't collapse. I just breathed. And for the first time, in weeks, it was only my breath, or so I hoped. In the aftermath, the apartment was still, not peaceful, never peaceful, but still in that dangerous, unnatural way, like the moment after a scream or before a car crash. Dust hung suspended in the air, catching the light of the single lamp that hadn't shattered. I stood barefoot, in broken glass, blood slowly beading along the sole of my foot, too numb to feel it. The crack was gone. That much was true. The wall had sealed itself so cleanly it looked untouched, as if the tear had never existed. But the silence it left behind was worse than anything that had come before. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of silence. It felt loaded, tense, like the space around me was listening. The Hollow King was gone, or at least I couldn't see him anymore. The red forest didn't bleed through the walls. My reflection didn't blink late. The air didn't pulse with that deep guttural presence I had grown so used to fearing. And yet I didn't feel relief. I felt like prey, frozen in a field, knowing the predator hadn't left, only moved where I couldn't see it. I slept that night with all the lights on, body curled under a blanket, one hand clutched around the pendant, the other clutching a kitchen knife. I told myself it was over. I repeated the words aloud like a chant. It's done, I closed it. But my voice sounded too flat, too alone. The next morning the sun streamed in as if the world outside hadn't changed. People walked dogs, Kids rode bikes. A jogger passed the front steps. All the banal rhythms of life resumed as though the cosmic horror I'd encountered had been a bad dream. I almost convinced myself it was. Almost. But then I opened my fridge. Inside was the notebook, the same one I'd thrown away weeks ago, the same one I'd buried behind layers of denial and fear. Its leather cover was dry now, cracked at the edges, but the symbol, the circle with the vertical line splitting it, was still etched deep. I hadn't seen that mark in days, and I knew I hadn't put it there. This wasn't over. I backed away, slowly, heart thudding, and shut the fridge like it might swallow me whole. I didn't open it again that day. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I sat on the floor, back against the door, watching the fridge as if it were breathing. Later that evening, Jordan called. His voice was hesitant, unsure. "You okay, man? You've been ghosting." I told him yes. I told him I was resting. I lied, and he knew it. But I think he also knew he couldn't help anymore. The last time he got involved, something followed him. He wouldn't say it, but I heard it in his voice. The same tension I used to carry before I stopped pretending. Something had looked at him, through me, and even though I'd closed the crack, echoes remained. That night, the quiet returned in full force. Not just in the apartment, but in me. My thoughts no longer layered themselves in chaotic spirals of fear and logic. Instead, they spread out like thin mist, drifting across a blank landscape. I stared at walls for hours. I walked from room to room with no intention, no memory of why I entered or left. And the pendant, that last gift from Maureen, grew cold in my hand. I fell asleep on the couch sometime after midnight, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't dream of the red forest. I dreamed of silence. In the dream, I sat in my apartment, but it was darker than usual, lit only by the faint glow of distant lightning behind the windows. Everything was in place, except there were no sounds, no hum of electricity, no creaks from the pipes, no outside traffic. It wasn't just muted, it was gone. Even my own breath made no sound. I tried to speak and no words came. I screamed, and silence poured out. Then I noticed movement in the mirror across the room. My reflection sat with me, mirrored on the couch, but its chest wasn't rising. It wasn't breathing, and it was smiling. It stood before I did. Moved. Before I moved, tilted its head just a second ahead of mine, and then finally it spoke, with my voice. "You sealed the door, Ethan, but not the house." I woke gasping, heart punching at my ribs, sweat soaking the sheets. The lights were off. I hadn't turned them off. My phone was dead. The clocks blinked 3:33, and in the hallway, though I didn't see anyone, I heard a sound I hadn't heard in a long time. Breathing. Not mine, shallow, close. Like someone waiting just outside the room, exhaling in slow anticipation. I stayed frozen until dawn. When the sun came up, I dared to walk to the mirror in the bathroom. It looked normal, I looked exhausted, but when I blinked, I swear, I didn't blink alone. So now I write this, not as a warning, not as a confession, but as a record. Because I think I've begun to understand what the Hollow King really is. He's not just a creature, not just a god thing that watches from behind the cracks in our world. He is the cracks, the silence between thoughts, the second reflection, the skipped heartbeat, the moment you check the room and find nothing but still know you're being watched. I sealed the door, but the walls remember, and the quiet isn't safe anymore. I closed the door. I followed the ritual. I sealed the crack with salt, with blood, with everything I had left to give. I buried the bone. I wrapped the thread tight. I whispered the words I barely understood, and I meant them with every cell, in my body. And for a moment, for a flicker of time that could have been minutes or centuries, it worked. The thing on the other side screamed in a language older than rot. The red forest folded into itself. The Hollow King's presence shrank like a dying breath. The apartment went still. The world realigned. I thought I had won. But winning isn't the same as freedom. Not in this place, not in this apartment, and certainly not with something ancient carved into the drywall of your soul. The silence remains. It's changed now, less like an enemy, more like an old scar that pulses when it rains. It doesn't chase me, not like before, but it's there, waiting. I'll be brushing my teeth and catch the faintest shape moving just outside the reflection's edge. I'll be halfway through a sentence and feel the thought evaporate mid-air, replaced by static. Sometimes I wake, up on the couch with my shoes on, my keys in my hand and the front door unlocked, though I remember locking it. And sometimes late at night I hear whispers from inside the wall, not cruel, not terrifying. Worse, they sound familiar. They sound like me. I tried to leave, packed everything into 2 duffel bags, stuffed the notebook into a trash chute, and walked out the front door with my back turned to the building. The sun was shining. My Uber arrived on time. I made it 5 blocks. Then I blinked and I was standing back in my apartment doorway, bag still on my shoulders, the doorknob warm in my hand. The hallway stretched behind me like it hadn't moved, like I'd never left. The apartment was open, lights on. As if it had been expecting me, I sat down and didn't move for hours. Eventually I tried again. This time I walked, ran even, took side streets, wrote landmarks down in a notebook. I passed strangers, construction sites, even a cop car. I reached the city bus station, boarded a bus going 3 hours north. I stayed on it, counted the turns, ate stale crackers, avoided the bathroom. When we reached the final stop, I got off in a different town. I checked into a motel under a fake name. That night I opened the drawer next to the bed, looking for the Bible every motel keeps. The notebook was inside. Same worn leather, same red thread tucked between the pages. It didn't even try to hide itself anymore. That's when I stopped running. Not because I gave up, but because I finally understood the truth I'd been avoiding. It's not the apartment that's cursed, it's me. Somewhere along the way, maybe the first night I heard my name whispered through the drywall, or maybe the moment I looked directly into the Hollow King's face, I became a conduit, a breach, a tether. Closing the door wasn't the end. It was a pause, a retraction, like an inhale before the next exhale. And now I carry the weight of that door with me. The rules have changed. The threat is no longer spatial, it's personal. It doesn't need a wall or a mirror or a crack in the paint. It lives in me, moves with me, breathes when I forget to be afraid. And worst of all, it knows I'm aware. That makes me a liability. Not just to myself, but to anyone near me. That's why I told Jordan to stop calling. That's why I didn't go to my parents when I had the chance. That's why I never answered the texts from the girl who said she missed me. I'm not being noble. I'm being practical. This thing follows awareness, attention. If I bring others into it, I hand it more doors to enter through. Now I live differently. I don't work, I don't socialize. I keep the apartment, not because I want to, but because it's mine in the same way a grave is yours. I feed its silence. I feed its stillness. I let the apartment breathe around me. I don't question the things that shift in the corner of my eye. I don't speak aloud after 3 a.m. I keep salt by every threshold, mirrors draped, and never listen. Too long when the static buzzes on the radio. But here's the part that scares me most. I'm starting to forget what life was like before. Not just memories, but emotions. That hot flash of joy when someone says your name. The sting of regret after a harsh word. The gentle ache of wanting to belong somewhere. Those feelings are fading, not stolen, not suppressed, just overwritten, rewritten by something colder, something vast. I dream now of the red forest not as a threat, but as home. I wake with my hand outstretched, like I've been reaching for something just outside the veil. Something that whispers back to me in gratitude, and sometimes in moments of terrifying clarity, I realize I've stopped fearing the Hollow King. I think I miss him. So yes, I closed the door, but I think another one opened, and this time it's inside me. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.